You're all welcome to Dr. Uduak lectures. Today I want to do a brief recap on our previous lectures that we had on the olfactory nerve. Like I initially told you, like we discussed earlier on in our previous lectures, we're able to establish that the olfactory nerve is known as the nerve that is implicated in smell or olfaction. Smell is also known as olfaction. So the olfactory nerve is a nerve that is implicated in smell. It is implicated in olfaction, and the olfactory nerve is actually the only cranial nerve that is very close to our external environment because of its location. It is actually located in the nasal cavity. In the nasal cavity, we have the nasal mucosa, which is a little bit above the superior concha. We have the inferior, the middle, and the superior concha. Now, above the superior concha, we have the mucous membrane, and above the mucous membrane, that is where we have the bipolar cells that eventually becomes the olfactory nerve. So in the mucus, in the what they call it, in the mucosa, the nasal mucosa, we have what we call olfactory receptors. These receptors are actually responsible for sensing odorant molecules that are present in our environment. And the olfactory receptors actually have two extensions, one of which is known as the peripheral process, the other one is known as the central process. Now, the peripheral process goes down to the mucous membrane and eventually becomes a knob, which we call the olfactory knob. And then in the knob, we have about 10 to 20 cilia. Now, these cilia are known as olfactory hairs. And in these olfactory hairs, we actually have what we call odorant receptors that are specific to the olfactory receptors. Now, like I said, the olfactory receptor is a bipolar receptor, and apart from the olfactory receptors, there are other cells that are present in the mucous membrane, like what we call supporting cells. If we don't call it supporting cells, we call it the sustentacular cells. The sustentacular cells are supporting cells that help to support the olfactory receptors. And we also have other cells which we call the the basal stem cell or stem cell. If we don't call it basal stem cell, we call it stem cell. Now, the basal stem cells are responsible for producing more more receptor cells, olfactory receptors, when they become damaged. So they are very important and very useful. Then we also have another structure in the nasal cavity, which is called the Bowman's gland. The Bowman's gland is a gland that is responsible for producing mucus. Now, apart from the fact that the Bowman's gland produces mucus, there's also another structure that also produces mucus alongside with the Bowman's gland, which is the sustentacular cell. It plays a supporting role and also plays an important role in producing mucus. Now, it is important to know that the olfactory receptors actually have a central process. Now, this central process actually passes through what we call the cribriform plates of the ethmoid bone. There are small openings in the cribriform plates, so they pass through these plates and then enters a structure that is called the olfactory bulb. Now, in the olfactory bulb, there are some cells. Like a very important one is the mitral cell. Apart from the mitral cell, we also have the tufted cell. We have the tufted cell, and we also have another one that is called the granule cell. And then we also have the periglomerular cells. So all these cells are found in the olfactory bulb. Now, from The mitral cells, the mitral cells, usually the mitral cells and the tufted cells, they have a connection, a synaptic connection with the central process of the receptor, the olfactory receptors that is coming from nasal cavity, and then they now extend downward from the olfactory bulb and eventually becomes the olfactory tract. So from the olfactory bulb, we have the olfactory tract, and then the olfactory tract, like I said, extends from the posterior end of the olfactory bulb and then moves down towards the olfactory cortex. Now, the olfactory cortex consists of, we have the primary cortex and then we have the secondary cortex. Now, the primary cortex consists of, we have the piriform cortex, and then we also have what we call the amygdala, or some persons will call it the periamygdaloid body. So these two structures actually make up the primary olfactory cortex. We have other structures like the anterior olfactory nucleus, and then we have the olfactory tubercle. And then we also have a structure that is called the olfactory, the secondary olfactory cortex, which is actually known as, we call it the secondary olfactory cortex is actually known as it is part of the hippocampal gyrus. In fact, we call it the entorhinal cortex. So the entorhinal cortex is actually known as the secondary olfactory cortex. So all these structures are actually implicated in actually giving meaning or interpreting smell or olfaction. They are responsible for the perception of odor and the perception of smell. And also it is important to know that there are some extensions of fibers that extends from the primary olfactory cortex and the secondary olfactory cortex down to the what we call the prefrontal cortex, and also what we call the orbitofrontal cortex, or the orbitofrontal gyrus. Very important. Orbitofrontal gyrus. So the orbitofrontal gyrus is an area that is especially important. It is very, very important in the perception of smell. Very important. Very, very important. It is implicated in the perception of smell. Thank you for listening. I hope this lecture is interesting, and I hope to see you next. When next we meet, we'll discuss more, and then we'll talk about other things and all that. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.